My name is David, and I never thought I would find myself in a situation like this. A year ago, I was a simple man with a simple life. I had a steady job as an accountant, a comfortable apartment in the city, and a wife I loved deeply. Her name is Melissa, and she was the kind of woman who could light up a room with her smile. We had been married for 5 years, and I thought we had built a solid foundation together. But as I would soon discover, everything was built on shaky ground. We lived not too far from a high-end casino called the Royal Mirage. It was a lavish place, filled with glitz and glamour, where the rich and famous came to gamble their fortunes. I had never been much of a gambler myself, but Melissa loved the thrill of it. I remember her excitement the first time we stepped into that casino together. She was always drawn to the flashing lights and the sound of clinking chips. It became a regular outing for her, and I often found myself sitting on the sidelines, watching her revel in the atmosphere while I sipped on a drink, feeling a bit out of place. The casino manager, a suave man named Victor, was a fixture there. He was everything I wasn't: charismatic, charming, and someone who seemed to have a way of making people feel special. I always thought it was harmless when Melissa would chat with him, exchanging pleasantries and laughter. I was naive, believing that our love was strong enough to withstand any temptation. Little did I know that behind the glimmering facade of the casino, a darker story was unfolding, one that would shatter my world. It was a Friday evening when everything changed. I had decided to surprise Melissa by joining her at the Royal Mirage after work. As I walked through the entrance, I felt a sense of anticipation. I imagined her face lighting up when she saw me, but when I found her, my heart sank. She was at the bar, nestled up against Victor, laughing a little too freely. The sight of them together sent a chill down my spine. I tried to brush it off, convinced that they were just being friendly, but deep down, a gnawing suspicion began to take root. The moment I approached them, I could feel the tension in the air. Melissa's laughter faded and Victor's smile turned into something more sinister. I confronted them, my voice shaking as I asked Melissa if she was ready to leave. The way she looked at me, a mix of guilt and defiance, was enough to send my mind racing. I could see the truth in her eyes, even if she refused to admit it. When we got home that night, the atmosphere was thick with unspoken words. I demanded to know what was going on. Melissa broke down, confessing to an affair with Victor that had been going on for months. My heart shattered into a million pieces. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and angry. How could she do this to me? The woman I had trusted with my heart had thrown it away for a man who thrived in a world of deception and greed. As I stood there, listening to her explanations, I felt a storm brewing inside me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw things. But more than anything, I felt the urge to do something, anything, to make her understand the pain she had caused me. I was no longer just a hurt husband. I was a man scorned, and I needed to find a way to channel that pain into something productive. Revenge started to take root in my mind, and I knew I had to act. But how? I needed a plan. Victor had taken my wife from me, and I was determined to make him pay for his betrayal. I began to think about the casino itself, a place that had become a symbol of my suffering. What if I could bring it down? What if I could make Victor lose everything he held dear? The idea consumed me, and I began to plot my revenge. The days that followed the revelation of Melissa's affair were a blur of anger and despair. I went through the motions of work and daily life, but inside I was a tempest of emotions. Each time I closed my eyes, I saw her with Victor, laughing and whispering secrets that should have been mine. The betrayal was a wound that festered, and I realized that I couldn't just sit back and let it fester away. I needed to confront this head-on, and that meant making Victor pay for what he had done. As I drove past the Royal Mirage on my way to work, it struck me how much power a place like that held over people. It was a hub of temptation, where fortunes could be made and lost in the blink of an eye. Victor thrived in that environment, using his charm to manipulate and seduce. I couldn't let him continue to ruin lives, including mine. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my revenge had to be calculated and precise. I couldn't afford to be reckless. I needed to be smart. I started gathering information about the casino. I learned about the inner workings of the Royal Mirage, how it operated, and the various vulnerabilities it had. I spent countless nights researching online and speaking with anyone who had inside knowledge. I discovered that the casino had been under scrutiny for illegal activities, including money laundering and fixing games. It was a gold mine of information, and I began to formulate a plan. One evening, I found myself sitting in front of my computer, researching the local laws regarding gambling and casino operations. I discovered a network of regulations that Victor and his team had been skirting for years. It was a labyrinth of loopholes, and I felt a surge of adrenaline as I pieced together the puzzle. I could report these illegal activities to the authorities, and if I played my cards right, I could ensure that Victor's empire would come crumbling down. But there was a risk involved. I knew that Victor wouldn't take kindly to being exposed. I had to be cautious, ensuring that I left no trace of my involvement. I started gathering evidence, taking notes on suspicious activities, and documenting anything that could be used against him. I even went undercover, posing as a potential high roller to gain access to the casino's inner sanctum. The thrill of being in the lion's den, all while plotting my revenge, sent shivers down my spine. During my visits to the Royal Mirage, I would watch Victor interact with his staff and patrons. He was a master at manipulation, charming his way through conversations, but I could see the cracks in his facade. I would overhear snippets of conversations that hinted at his questionable dealings. It was intoxicating to think that I was gathering the ammunition I needed to take him down, but there were moments of doubt. I would lie awake at night, wrestling with the morality of my plan. Was I justified in ruining someone else's life, even if they had wronged me? I thought about Melissa. My heart still ached for her, but I also felt a simmering resentment. She had chosen Victor over me, and I couldn't let that betrayal go unpunished. It was a twisted sense of justice that propelled me forward. As the weeks turned into months, I became more entrenched in my plan. I began to build a network of allies, people who had grievances against Victor and his casino. I reached out to disgruntled employees, gamblers who had been cheated, and anyone who had a bone to pick with the Royal Mirage. Together, we formed a small coalition, united by a common goal, to expose the underbelly of the casino and bring it crashing down. The thrill of my clandestine meetings and whispered conversations filled me with a sense of purpose. I was no longer just a victim, I was a man on a mission. With each passing day, I felt more empowered, convinced that I was doing the right thing. I was ready to take the next step, to set my plan into motion. I had gathered enough evidence to make a compelling case against Victor and the Royal Mirage. I knew the time had come to act. I would report everything to the authorities, and in doing so, I would ensure that Victor lost everything he had built. The thought of his downfall brought a dark satisfaction to my heart. The night before I was to make my report, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I hardly recognized the man looking back at me. The pain of betrayal had transformed me into something I never intended to become. Yet I felt a sense of clarity. I was ready to unleash my revenge, and nothing would stop me. The following morning, I awoke with a sense of purpose that both exhilarated and terrified me. I had meticulously crafted my plan, and now it was time to put it into action. I had gathered enough evidence to make my case against Victor and the Royal Mirage, but the gravity of what I was about to do weighed heavily on my conscience. I had spent months plotting this revenge, and while the thought of Victor's downfall filled me with a sense of justice, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a moral abyss. As I prepared to leave for the police station, I took a moment to collect my thoughts. I had been living in a shadow of anger and hurt, and now I was ready to step into the light of action. My heart raced as I thought about what I was about to do. I imagined Victor's smug expression when the authorities came crashing down on him, pulling the rug out from under his lavish lifestyle. The thought fueled my resolve, but the image of my wife's face also haunted me. Would she side with him? Would she even care? I arrived at the police station, my palms sweaty and my heart pounding. As I walked through the doors, I felt the weight of my decision settle in. I approached the front desk and asked to speak with someone about a tip regarding illegal activities at the Royal Mirage. The officer's expression turned serious, and he led me to a small interrogation room. As I sat there, the cold fluorescent lights above me flickered ominously. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of the reasons I was there. I recounted everything I had witnessed, the conversations I had overheard, the shady dealings I had documented. The officer listened attentively, nodding as I spoke. I handed over my evidence, feeling a mix of dread and relief wash over me. I had done what I set out to do. After I finished my statement, the officer assured me that they would investigate my claims. I left the station with a sense of accomplishment, but it quickly faded as I realized that I had just unleashed a storm. What if Victor found out? What if he retaliated? The fear gnawed at me, but I pushed it aside. I had to stay focused. Over the next few days, I kept a low profile, avoiding the Royal Mirage and any interactions with Melissa. I didn't want to raise any suspicions, but the anxiety was suffocating. I couldn't shake the feeling that Victor was watching me, waiting for the right moment to strike back. I had to remain vigilant. Then, on a fateful Saturday night, everything changed. I received an anonymous tip that the authorities were preparing to raid the Royal Mirage. My heart raced with a mix of excitement and fear. I rushed to the casino, my mind racing with possibilities. I wanted to see the fallout, to witness Victor's empire crumble before my eyes. As I approached the entrance, I felt a surge of adrenaline. The casino was alive with the sounds of laughter and clinking chips, but I was there for a different reason. I slipped inside, blending in with the crowd, my heart pounding as I waited for the moment of reckoning. I could see Victor at the bar, his usual charm on display as he engaged with patrons. I felt a twisted sense of satisfaction. Suddenly, the atmosphere shifted. I could see flashing lights outside, sirens blaring. The casino patrons were oblivious at first, but as the commotion escalated, confusion spread through the crowd. I stood frozen, watching as officers stormed the entrance, shouting orders. My heart raced. This was the moment I had been waiting for. Victor's demeanor changed instantly. The confident casino manager became a man cornered, his charm evaporating as he realized what was happening. I felt a rush of vindication wash over me as I watched the officers approach him. They began questioning him, and I could see the panic in his eyes. I wanted to revel in the moment, but I also felt a pang of guilt. Was this really justice, or had I simply become a monster in my pursuit of revenge? As the officers led Victor away in handcuffs, I felt a strange mix of triumph and emptiness. The casino was in chaos, patrons were screaming, and the reality of what I had done began to sink in. I had set this in motion, and now I was witnessing the consequences of my actions unfold. I slipped out of the casino before anyone could recognize me, my mind racing with thoughts. I had succeeded in taking down Victor, but at what cost? I drove home in a daze, replaying the events in my mind. I had lost my wife, and now I had taken away Victor's life as he knew it. I wondered if I had truly achieved closure or if I had only opened a deeper wound within myself. That night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the silence echoing my turmoil. I thought about Melissa and the choices I had made. I had sought revenge, but now I was left with a hollow victory. The thrill of my actions had faded, leaving behind a sense of loneliness and regret. I closed my eyes, hoping that sleep would bring me clarity, but the chaos inside my mind refused to quiet. The days following the raid on the Royal Mirage were a blur of chaos and confusion. News of Victor's arrest spread like wildfire, and the casino was forced to shut its doors indefinitely. I had succeeded in my plan, but the aftermath was far from what I had envisioned. I had taken down a man who had wronged me, yet I felt no satisfaction, only a gnawing emptiness that threatened to consume me. I avoided Melissa for the most part, but I could feel her presence looming over me. Every time I saw her name pop up on my phone, a wave of guilt washed over me. I knew she was hurting, but I also felt a sense of resentment. She had chosen Victor over me, and now, in my quest for revenge, I had taken away the very thing that had drawn her to him in the first place, a world filled with excitement, glamour, and risk. One evening, unable to bear the silence in my apartment any longer, I decided to go out for a drink. I found myself at a local bar, drowning my sorrows in whiskey and trying to forget the mess my life had become. As I sat there, nursing my drink, I overheard a couple at the bar discussing the fallout from the casino's closure. They spoke of how many jobs had been lost and how the community was reeling from the sudden impact. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My actions had consequences far beyond just Victor's downfall. I had inadvertently affected countless lives, and the weight of that realization was crushing. That night, I returned home feeling more lost than ever. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, replaying my choices in my mind. Had I truly thought this through? Had I considered the collateral damage? I had sought revenge, but now I was left with a deep sense of regret. I wanted to blame Victor for everything, but I knew I had played a part in this too. I had let my anger consume me, and in the process I had lost sight of who I was. The next morning, I woke with a renewed sense of urgency. I needed to make things right, not just for myself, but for everyone affected by the casino's closure. I reached out to some of the people I had spoken to during my investigation, those who had grievances against Victor and his operations. I wanted to gather them together to form a coalition not for revenge, but for reform. Perhaps we could work together to ensure that something like this wouldn't happen again, that others wouldn't have to suffer the way I had. As I began to organize meetings, I felt a flicker of hope. I called on former employees of the Royal Mirage, gamblers who had been cheated, and even some community leaders who were interested in restoring the casino's reputation. We met in a small conference room at a local community center, and I laid out my vision. I wanted to create a safe space for people to voice their concerns and to hold those in power accountable. At first, there was skepticism. Many were still reeling from the shock of Victor's arrest and the sudden loss of their jobs. But as I shared my story, my betrayal, my quest for revenge, and my realization of the broader impact, it resonated with them. They began to open up about their experiences, sharing tales of dishonesty, manipulation, and the lack of oversight in the casino industry. Together, we began to forge a plan. We decided to take our findings to the local government, advocating for stricter regulations and oversight of casinos. We organized rallies and protests, drawing attention to the plight of those affected by the casino's closure. Slowly but surely, our movement began to gain traction, and I felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was the path I needed to take, not one of vengeance, but of healing and accountability. As the weeks went by, I couldn't help but notice how this new mission was changing me. I started to feel a sense of camaraderie with those around me. We were all united by a common goal, and it was refreshing to see people come together to fight for something greater than themselves. I began to find solace in the shared struggles, and I felt a connection to the community that I had never experienced before. But even as I immersed myself in this new purpose, the shadow of my past actions lingered. I couldn't escape the feeling that I had caused irreparable harm, and I often found myself questioning whether I could truly find redemption. I thought about Melissa and what she must have been going through. I knew I had to face her, to confront the reality of what had happened between us. One evening, after a particularly successful rally, I found myself standing outside the casino, now boarded up and abandoned. The sight was a stark reminder of what I had set in motion. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I needed to do. I pulled out my phone and sent a message to Melissa, asking if we could meet. I needed to explain myself, to share my journey since the fallout, and perhaps to seek forgiveness. The response came quickly. She agreed to meet me at a nearby cafe. As I drove there, my heart raced. I didn't know what to expect. Would she be angry? Would she still be in love with Victor? The uncertainty gnawed at me, but I knew I had to face her. I had to confront the truth of our shattered relationship and find a way to move forward, together or apart. As I sat at the cafe, waiting for her to arrive, I felt a mixture of anxiety and hope. I had taken down Victor, but now I had to confront the wreckage left in the wake of my actions. I hoped that, in doing so, I could finally find some semblance of peace. I sat at the cafe, my hands trembling slightly as I stirred my coffee, the steam rising like the tension in my chest. I had rehearsed what I wanted to say to Melissa 1,000 times in my mind, but now that the moment was here, the words felt inadequate. I could see the door from my seat, and with every passing second, my heartbeat quickened. Would she walk in with anger in her eyes, or would she be the same warm Melissa I had fallen in love with? When she finally entered, I felt a rush of emotions. She looked different, haggard and worn, the light in her eyes dimmed. My heart sank at the sight of her. I stood up and our eyes met, a silent acknowledgement of the pain that had transpired between us. She approached slowly, and I gestured for her to sit. "David," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. There was an awkwardness in the air, filled with unsaid words and heavy memories. "Thank you for meeting me," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "I know this isn't easy." She nodded, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I wanted to talk about everything that happened, about Victor, about us. I know I hurt you, and I want to explain why I did what I did." Her gaze dropped to the table, and I could see the hurt etched on her face. "I don't know if there's anything you can say that will change what happened, David. I made a mistake and I hurt you, but your actions, they've hurt a lot of people too." Her words struck me like a slap. She was right. I had acted out of anger and revenge, and now I had to face the consequences of those choices. "I know," I admitted, my voice thick with emotion. "I didn't think about the collateral damage. I was consumed by my feelings, my anger, my need for revenge. I thought taking Victor down would somehow fix everything, but it only made things worse." She looked up at me, her eyes searching mine. "Do you really believe that bringing him down would make everything okay?" "I thought it would," I replied, my voice trembling. "I thought it would bring me closure, but then I realized that it didn't just affect Victor, it affected everyone connected to him, including you. I didn't want to hurt you, Melissa. I wanted to protect us." Her expression softened slightly, but the pain was still evident. "You don't understand. I was drawn to Victor because he represented something I felt was missing in our lives. I didn't mean to hurt you, but I was looking for excitement, for something different. I didn't know it would lead to this." I felt a pang of sadness at her admission. "I get that now. I should have communicated better, should have listened to you. I was so caught up in my own feelings that I didn't realize how distant we had become. I thought I could fix everything by taking revenge, but all I did was add to the mess." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of our conversation hanging heavily between us. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the struggle between the love we once had and the pain that now defined us. "What do we do now?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I admitted, feeling the tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "I want to make things right. I want to help the people affected by the casino's closure. I've started a movement to push for better regulations in the industry, to hold those in power accountable. I want to turn this pain into something positive." Melissa's expression shifted slightly, curiosity mingling with skepticism. "You're serious about that?" "Yes," I replied earnestly. "I want to work with others to ensure that what happened to us doesn't happen to anyone else. I want to help those who lost their jobs, those who were cheated. I want to make a difference." She leaned back in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she considered my words. "And what about us, David? Can we ever go back to what we had?" My heart raced at her question. "I don't know. If we can, I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again, or if you can trust me after everything that's happened, but I want to try. I want to rebuild not just our relationship, but ourselves." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment I thought she might cry. "I want that too, but it's going to take time. We can't just pretend everything is okay." "I know," I said, feeling a surge of hope. "I'm willing to put in the work. I want to be better for you, for us." She nodded slowly, a flicker of determination crossing her face. "Then let's start there. Let's take it one day at a time, but we need to be honest with each other. No more secrets, no more running away." "Agreed," I said, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. As we continued to talk, sharing our thoughts and fears, I felt a sense of connection begin to grow again. It was fragile, but it was there. We discussed the future, the changes we both needed to make, and for the first time in a long while I felt a glimmer of hope. After our conversation, we parted ways with a tentative understanding. I knew that rebuilding would be a long and arduous journey, but I was willing to fight for it. I had taken down Victor, and in the process I had learned about the consequences of my actions. Now I needed to focus on healing, not just for myself, but for Melissa and for the community we had both been a part of. As I walked back to my car, I felt lighter. I had faced my past, confronted the pain, and taken the first step towards a new beginning. But the journey was far from over. I still had to navigate the fallout from my actions and the impact they had on others. I was determined to make things right, to ensure that my quest for revenge led to something meaningful. The weeks that followed my meeting with Melissa were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. I threw myself into the movement I had started, rallying support from the community and working alongside former employees of the Royal Mirage. We held meetings, organized protests, and lobbied local officials to implement stricter regulations on casinos. It felt good to be part of something larger than myself, to channel my pain into a force for change. I often found myself reflecting on the choices I had made, both in my pursuit of revenge and in my attempts to rebuild my relationship with Melissa. The guilt of my actions still lingered, but I was learning to navigate it. I had turned my anger into advocacy, and with each small victory, each new ally gained, each regulation proposed, I felt a sense of redemption slowly washing over me. Melissa and I began to rebuild our relationship, brick by brick. We started with small steps, honest conversations, shared experiences, and a commitment to transparency. It wasn't easy. There were moments of tension when the shadows of the past threatened to resurface. But we faced those moments together, determined not to let the weight of our mistakes define us. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, I turned to her and said, "You know, I never thought I could feel this way again. After everything that happened, I was convinced I had lost you for good. But now, I see a path forward." She smiled softly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hope and caution. "I feel it too, David, but we need to remember that it's a journey. We can't rush it." "I know," I replied, "and I'm committed to doing this right. I want us to be stronger together." As the movement gained momentum, I found myself invited to speak at various community events. I shared my story, not just of betrayal and revenge, but of healing and transformation. I talked about the importance of accountability in the casino industry and how it was crucial for the community to stand together against corruption. Each time I spoke, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me. I was no longer just the victim. I was an advocate for change. But not everyone was pleased with our efforts. Victor's legal team began to push back, attempting to discredit our movement and paint us as disgruntled individuals seeking revenge rather than reform. They launched a smear campaign trying to undermine our credibility. The stress of the situation weighed heavily on me, but I refused to back down. I had come too far to let fear dictate my actions. Melissa stood by my side through it all, her unwavering support giving me strength. We faced adversity together, learning to lean on each other in ways we had never done before. I realized that this experience had forged a bond between us that was deeper than before. We had both emerged from the wreckage of our past, determined to create a future built on trust and mutual respect. As the movement gained traction, we organized a large rally to bring attention to the need for reform in the casino industry. I stood on the stage, looking out at the crowd of supporters, friends, former employees, and community members, united by a common cause. I felt a surge of pride and hope. This was more than just about Victor's downfall. It was about creating a safer environment for everyone involved in the industry. Together, we can make a difference. I shouted into the microphone, the crowd erupting into cheers. Together, we can ensure that no one else has to suffer the way we have. The energy in the air was electric, and for the first time since everything had unraveled, I felt a sense of peace. I had found purpose in my pain, and I was no longer defined by my past. I had turned my anger into action, and in doing so I had rediscovered a sense of hope. As the rally concluded, I stepped down from the stage, my heart racing with excitement. I looked for Melissa in the crowd and saw her beaming at me, pride evident in her eyes. I rushed to her side and she wrapped her arms around me, holding me tightly. "We did it," I whispered, filled with a profound sense of gratitude. "We're making a difference." "Yes, we are," she replied, pulling back to look into my eyes. "And we're doing it together." In that moment, I realized that while the scars of our past would always remain, they no longer defined us. We had fought through the darkness and emerged stronger, united by a shared commitment to change. I felt a deep sense of love for Melissa, not just for the woman she had been, but for the partner she had become. As we stood there, surrounded by the energy of our supporters, I knew that our journey was far from over. There would be challenges ahead, but we were ready to face them together. We had turned betrayal into strength, and in doing so, we had not only reclaimed our lives but had also become advocates for a brighter future. I took Melissa's hand, feeling the warmth of her touch, and together we stepped forward into the light, ready to embrace whatever came next. With that realization, I understood. Revenge may have brought me to this point, but it was love, resilience, and the pursuit of justice that would guide me forward. The nature of betrayal may have changed me, but it was the power of forgiveness and hope that would ultimately define my path. And for the first time in a long while, I felt free.